So, have any of you ever heard of the artist by the name of Hokusai? You familiar with him? No? Are you familiar with the art form of ukiyo-e? You've heard of it? Well, that's a good start. Okay, so we're going to learn a little bit about Hokusai, and we're going to learn a little bit about ukiyo-e, because this is an art form that he is most popular for. So, here is a self-portrait that he did during his life when he was a little bit older. He was a Japanese artist, and there's a short little video clip we're going to take a look at, and it'll give you a little bit of an introduction to him. And then we'll look at some of his works and maybe talk about a few other things, okay? So, without further ado...
Hokusai was born in 1760, and his works still feel contemporary today. He worked in the Edo period, which lasted from 1603 to 1868, during which foreigners were not admitted into Japan, and Japanese were not allowed to travel abroad. The capital was Edo, which grew into today's Tokyo. Central power lay in the hands of the shogun. There are no photos because, due to this isolation, photography arrived late in Japan. Hokusai's father was a mirror craftsman. He found an apprenticeship for his 13-year-old son in an engraving shop. At 19, Hokusai decided he wanted to be an artist. He chose to become a student of Edo's Grand Master of woodblock prints. Hokusai learned fast, and he would never stop learning. This is thought to be his first work, an engraving of a famous kabuki actor. His joy in describing the variety of life itself had only just begun. "29 years old, sumo wrestlers, woodblock print. 33 years old, silhouettes to cut out and stick on the picture of an actor. 38 years old, an ancient turtle, ink, colours, gofen, and slivers of gold on paper. 40 years old, landscape with bridge at the foot of the hills, woodblock print. 49 years old, a beauty standing and tying her obi, colours and gofen on silk. 51 years old, carp and turtles, ink and colours on paper. 57 years old, tiger and bamboo in the light of the full moon, colours on silk. 64 years old, single brushstroke painting, woodblock print. 69 years old, a lesson in sand painting, woodblock print. "Nothing I produced before my 70th year is worth mentioning," he said. Hokusai had set himself a goal to always progress in his adventure of the eye.
Alright, so that's kind of a brief introduction. So, he, did other things besides this ukiyo-e. Some of those things I mentioned there. He did some manga books. You guys familiar with what manga is? Anybody? We got a few head nods, yeah? Okay, so this is probably not so much like you would think of the modern manga, which would be more like graphic novels that they produce in Japan. This would be more just the illustrations, and those were very popular during his time. And he used these also as a means to teach people how to draw, so they could purchase his books and use the references and learn how to draw different things. So here's a little excerpt from that. Another excerpt from one of his manga books. Okay, so in that little clip, it talked about his one-stroke images. So here's another example of that. So if you look closely at the image, you can Here you see where he starts. I would say he probably started about here in the head and then wraps around, comes up, and zigzags across this turtle and then finishing out for the tail. So it's kind of an interesting art form that he was also famous for. Okay, so we have a little bit more of some of those one-stroke illustrations, just to show you some of his other works that he did. So this is a painting he did on silk. So this is more like a tapestry. So you can see a lot with this type of art, this Japanese art. Things are very linear and a little bumpy in their perspectives, which is kind of unique to that particular culture. Okay, so this is called The Old Fisherman Smoking His Pipe. So this is actually more of a self-portrait he did as the fisherman, and I believe this is a ukiyo-e print. So ukiyo-e, when you translate that into English, it literally means pictures of the floating world. So this was an art form that was very popular during this period of time that Hokusai lived, during the Edo period. And what you see a lot with these images, and what was popular at the time, they would do lots of kabuki actors, and they would do some courtesans and things like that, and those were probably what would be most common. Something that maybe made Hokusai unique to other artists of that time is he would do landscapes and other things, images of the common people. So that made him, a little more unique, and I think that also helped to make him maybe a little more popular with your average person who wasn't, of wealth and prestige and that sort of thing. So anyway, this is an image that kind of shows you how those were maybe done, and they're done in various ways. This particular image uses multiple blocks, but sometimes they just have one block. And I have another video that maybe shows you or explains how this process works, so you can better understand how the printmaking functioned during this time.
This is a reproduction of an old printing block. It's in mountain cherry tree wood. The reason this hardwood is used is because ukiyo-e prints weren't unique examples. They were mass-produced and were destined to flood the market and be sold as widely as possible. Ukiyo-e blocks weren't long-lasting. Once the first drawing stopped selling, the blocks were sanded down. Take this block, for example. To start with, it would have been this thick. But once the work stopped selling, it was sanded back down. The thickness was reduced. But this enabled the carving and printing of a new work. So it was a very ecological usage, because the blocks were consistently recycled. The first step in making a ukiyo-e print is to trace the drawing on a sheet of Japanese paper like this. Once the proof was validated by the printer, the drawing was sent straight to the engraver. The engraver then glued the drawing face down, like this, directly onto the cherry wood block. Like this. Then once stuck, he used a small sculptor's knife with a very fine blade like that of a Stanley knife. With this tool, he would carve the grooves on either side of the artist's lines. Once the grooves were scooped out and the block sanded down, the result was the amahang, the complete block. One of the particularities of woodblock prints is that the original drawing produced by Hokusai disappeared into the block because you cut directly onto the glued-on paper. When placing the sheet of paper, this allows you to position it easily on each block. There are little notches called kento. This made it possible to print multicolored drawings, like those by Hokusai. Plus, they also enabled a beautiful superposition of colors to be produced rapidly and efficiently.
Alright, so are we familiar with this image? Have we seen this image before? So this is probably, arguably, I would say, the most famous image produced from Japan, the most famous work of art. And so this was one of those ukiyo-e prints. So in that little video, it showed you how the process was made. And so we're going to look at some of these prints of his. So this was one of a series of 36 images that he did of Mount Fuji. And this particular work has made him, famous throughout Japan. It also made him famous more internationally as well. So we'll start looking at this one because this, of course, is his most famous work. And we're going to look at some of the other ones, and we'll maybe look at how this one differs, or maybe why this one is the most popular of the series. So maybe pay attention to the perspective, the colors used, and things like that. So as we look at some of these other prints, we won't spend a lot of time looking at them. I just want you to see some of the variations of the images. Okay? So here we have fine wood, clear morning. So another one of the same images are in the series. So Hokusai had a fascination with Mount Fuji, and this whole work is kind of inspired by that. And you also see some of the common people elements that he was also famous for using in his works. So during his lifetime, too, Hokusai went by 30 different names, and that was during different periods of time that he was working. He created art under a certain name, but of course the name that he's most famous for is his Hokusai name, and that's the one that everybody refers to him as. So maybe some things to pay attention to are some of the colors, some of the perspective that the image is created in. Because we're gonna talk about why you think that first image was most popular of these various images. Now, of course, these are all fine examples of his work, and they're all interesting in their own unique way, but for some reason that first one seems to be the most popular internationally and most recognized image of his work. Okay. So Hokusai is considered one of the masters of art, and of course, he kept working and producing art till the day he died, and was always trying to do better and to be better, and never, I guess, was really satisfied with the way he was. Always wanted to be better. Like in that first video, it mentioned that he thought none of the work he did before the age 70 was worth mentioning. So that was a good 50 years of work that he was like, it's no good. So I don't know, just something to think about. All right, so again, there's 36 of these different images, so we'll just kind of quickly take a glance and move on to the next, just so that we don't run out of time today. We're almost there, guys. Just wait for it. So after the end of the Edo period, Japan was opened up again because during his lifetime it was closed off to foreigners and other things like that. A lot of artists and European people started collecting these works, and I think that also helped to make some of these things so famous. So now that we've looked at some of these other images in the series, what about this image do you think makes it stand out, or why do you think this one is maybe more popular than some of the other images? Just your thoughts. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. I just want to get your opinion.
Yeah. A lot of the other images were really centered around like a bluish green type of scale. And even though there's blue in this one, it's there's a little more diversity in color, and I think there's a little less like detail, more or less, about the amount of things that are put in, but more detail on like what the waves are looking like. And I think, I don't know why, but I feel like the boat makes it really appealing, and like the different shades of blue in the waves make it a little more appealing than the other paintings.
So a lot of these other ones, are a lot more green in their tone, and this one is maybe more vibrant. So I think, that definitely could be a reason. Any other thoughts, opinions? So I'm going to point out a few things about this image that are different from some of these other images. Okay, number one is the perspective that's used. So some of these other images, these are more of a bird's eye view. So you're up a little higher or looking down at the scene. So your view is a lot more elevated. Okay, whereas this image from this particular perspective, you're right at ground level. You're like right inside of the scene. So in that case, that image, it varies from some of the other ones, and that could be part of its popularity. And there's things to kind of discover in this image. So when you initially look at it, really what you see is this huge wave. It's creating this tension in the image, but upon closer examination, you can start to see, there's some guys in boats here that maybe when you first initially look at that, you don't notice that. We have to work around the technology. Okay, so you did mention the color blue. So something else about this, Prussian blue, that was the color used for this, and that was not a color that was found in Japan. That was something that was maybe smuggled in a color that they used. So with that, you have more of a Western European kind of influence on it. So that possibly too could be why it's appealing, because of the color used. Okay. Some of the other things. Oh, what were they? Let me think. Okay, so the color, the perspective, and really, I think with Hokusai, he had some European influence as well. As though the country was closed off from other countries, there were still people that were smuggling works from European countries in, and Hokusai was able to get his hands on some of those European works of art. And I think with this one, he was letting some of that influence the way he was creating his image, though it is, has a very Japanese style, but it also has a little bit of a European influence on it. So that could be too why this particular image is popular amongst the international world. So, I don't know. Any other thoughts, comments? No? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a parody of this work using the Great Wave off of Kanagawa as our reference. And we're going to recreate this and make it our own unique thing. So I'm going to show you maybe a couple examples to maybe give you some ideas. And you don't necessarily have to design your image in this fashion, but maybe it will give you an idea more of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about creating a parody. So, of course, the main part of the image is the great wave, of course, and then how this image was altered or created the parody. We have this mermaid flying out of the wave as opposed to having the fisherman and that sort of thing. But we still have Mount Fuji hidden in the background. And I have another example that's very similar. Instead of a mermaid, we have Aquaman. But when you create your parody, you don't necessarily have to have some character flying out of the waves. You can alter the image in some other way.